Hello, hello. So in this live, I'm going to be explaining why most people are doing 90% of their shoulder rehab wrong and probably the 9 biggest mistakes people are making and how to fix these mistakes. So let's jump into the questions right away. Why does my shoulder hurt when I press bench or overhead squat? So this is a little bit of an open-ended question, quite not a simple one at all. Let's start with pressing. So let's start with overhead pressing or bench pressing. A big reason people get pain when they're bench pressing is actually because their shoulder blades are pinned down and back on the bench and your shoulder blades don't move if you bench press before. The reason this isn't ideal is because in pressing movements and in throwing movements as well, the shoulder blade is designed to move and assist the shoulder. But obviously when you bench press, the shoulder blade isn't moving because it's pinned on the bench. This can put a lot of unnecessary stress on the shoulder and you'll get big deltoids, big shoulder muscles, you get a big chest, but you're not necessarily designed to press in that way. Hopefully that makes sense. Whereas it's a lot less common with a strict press or an overhead press because your shoulder blades are actually moving. So a lot of people who get shoulder pain issues from bench pressing, excuse me, what I'll do is I'll get them doing pressing variations where they're actually moving their shoulder blade, like an overhead press, a landmine press, something along those lines. That usually solves a lot of issues. If you are getting shoulder pain from overhead pressing, then more likely it's something else going on. That could be a range of different things. It could be a mobility issue at one shoulder compared to the other, and this could be caused by maybe limitations at your spine or your rib cage or your shoulder blades, or it could be a strength issue. It's impossible to answer with the overhead press, but more than likely with the bench press, it's because you're pinning your shoulder blades to the bench all the time. In an overhead squat, where you've got the bar overhead in a fairly wide grip for most people, the issue here again is open-ended. It could be mobility, it could be strength, it could be stability at your spine, at your shoulder, at your rib cage, a lot of different things. So really there I can only answer the bench one in a lot of detail, unfortunately. Is it normal to have clicking or popping in the shoulder? Yes, very, very normal. A lot of the clicking and popping sometimes can just be pockets of air that are moving around, and that's why a lot of the time you won't get pain with that clicking or popping. But other times it can be damage or discomfort, and not that damage is necessarily a bad thing, because if you play a lot of sport, if you use your shoulder a lot over time, especially as you start to get older, whatever that means, you'll start to pick up little niggles here and there. But also these might not necessarily translate to pain. I always go back to this example, but if you took 2 people, person A, person B, and they both go in for an MRI scan of their shoulder, person A goes in and they're not reporting any shoulder pain. They go in and get the scan. The doctor says, yeah, you've got loads of damage at your shoulder. You've got arthritis. You've got rotator cuff tears. Person B goes in. They're actually reporting loads of shoulder pain before they go in, but on the scan, there's no damage. So it's not necessarily that simple. So with the clicking and popping, if there's pain associated with it, then you should probably get looked at or work with a coach to fix it. If it's not painful, but it's still causing like mobility issues or it's just annoying, maybe get it fixed. If it's not bothering you, then I wouldn't particularly take notice of it. Next one, can I keep training while rehabbing shoulder pain? Yes, definitely. So obviously when rehabbing a shoulder, more than likely you're going to have to back off maybe what you're doing with your upper body movements if you like to bench press a lot or do things like that. And it would still be a lot of upper body work with shoulder rehab, because essentially we want to get all the muscles around the shoulder, like your triceps, your biceps, your back muscles strong, mobile, train them through the full range of motion again. It would just be slightly modified for rehab. Obviously, with painful shoulder, you can still train a lot of lower body stuff, quads, hamstrings, squatting movements, hinging movements, things like that, plyometrics, jumping, bounding. So there's always things in rehab that you can kind of prioritize, and while you're rehabbing the shoulder, you can definitely build up strengths in other areas, or if you're weak in other areas, such as particular lower body movements, then maybe you can build that up while rehabbing the shoulder. For example, with a lot of shoulder clients, what I would normally do is give them 2 to 3 days of upper body slash shoulder work, and then if they're normally training more than that anyways, then on the other 1 or 2 days I would give them some leg, lower body, jumping, bounding work to do as well, especially if they were trying to get back to a sport that involved that. How do I know if it's a mobility or strength problem? Really good question. So what you generally want to do here is actually, this is more common sense than a lot of people think in a lot of cases. You want to think, what sport do I do? What's kind of my base level of flexibility slash mobility? Yeah, do I go to the gym a lot? Am I naturally quite strong? I'll give you a really good example. Gymnasts, for example, let's take a female gymnast. In most cases, it's going to be a strength and stability issue. It's very rarely a flexibility or mobility issue, because female gymnasts are incredibly hypermobile and they get into lots of different and difficult positions with their shoulder. Whereas if you take a rugby player who takes a lot of impact on the shoulder, has had previous shoulder injuries, and just bench presses, then more than likely it's probably more than likely going to be a mobility issue. So this isn't always the case, but it's just a good general rule of thumb. Think about, what kind of body type you are, what sport do you play, what activities do you do, are you naturally strong or quite flexible? That honestly answers a lot of the question a lot of the time. What's the one exercise that fixes most shoulder pain? God, definitely a good question, but it's just one that you can't answer. I can give you probably one of my favorite ones, or the one I use the most, is a bottom-up kettlebell hold, an isometric for early stage shoulder rehab. So you would grab a kettlebell in a bottom-up grip. So you're not grabbing the big bit of the kettlebell, you're actually grabbing the handle and the big weights up here. And then you're literally like holding the kettlebell at that sort of angle. So 90-degree bend at your shoulder, 90-degree bend at your elbow out in front of you, starting really, really light, going for 2 to 3 sets of 45 seconds. Again, this isn't a miracle worker, but it helps build a lot of rotator cuff strength, grip strength, and reduce a lot of pain. That's probably my most used one, but again, it's definitely not the only exercise I give people. If I just gave them that, they wouldn't be able to get back to a lot of different things. It's probably just an early stage one I give to a lot of people. How often should I be working on shoulder mobility? Good question, but a lot of the time, to be honest, when people lack internal rotation or external rotation or flexion at the shoulder, a lot of the time the issue is somewhere else. So a lot of the time they're not very bendy through their spine, they move a bit like a block or a brick, or they can't move their shoulder blades very well, or they can't move their rib cage very well. So actually there's bigger structures that you'd get more bang for your buck if you worked on improving those. So getting your spine rotating, getting your spine side bending, flexing, extending well, getting your rib cage to expand, expansion, compression, so essentially breathing better, and then getting your shoulder blades moving. And that's more a case of adding in pressing movements and pulling movements where your shoulder blades are moving and your spine is moving as well. So I like med ball slams, med ball rotations, cable rows with a bit of rotation, cable presses with a bit of rotation. There's lots of different options there. How do I stop shoulder pain from coming back? So what I do with everyone, but specifically for shoulder pain, it's making sure you're ticking all the different boxes if you look at physical qualities. So is your shoulder mobile enough? Is it strong enough? And then speed qualities. So can it handle fast explosive movements? Can it handle impact in unpredictable situations if that's required in your sport or activity? So like rugby, for example, or throwing a javelin, there's a lot of dynamic force going through the shoulder. It really depends on that. If you're just wanting to get back to maybe you're a painter and decorator and you're getting pain when you're overhead like this, that would obviously be a much lower level of strength compared to someone who's like a, let's say, professional javelin thrower, something like that. And then the other thing around shoulder pain is education is a big part of it as well. So just teaching you that how to manage flare-ups and maybe plug some of the exercises in again to start from a certain stage if the shoulder pain flares back up, and how to manage that. Are warm-ups actually helpful or just a waste of time? Warm-ups are very individual. So some people really need warm-ups, other people don't need warm-ups. During rehab, I think the mobility work that I give people to start with acts as a warm-up, and I think it's really useful for rehab because it gets your brain engaged, gets tissues moving that are quite stiff. But if you're fit and healthy and you don't actually have any pain, I don't think they're that useful if you're already quite a warm person, which sounds a bit weird, but like, for example, I'm quite a warm person. I have a very high body temperature. So when I go into the gym, I can literally I really don't need to warm up. I can usually just start doing the exercise. My first exercise, I just do it at a much lighter weight, much lower intensity. But for some people, they do need it. And if you're rehabbing a shoulder, I would say you need 5, 10, 15 minutes of mobility on those big sites again, spine, rib cage, getting the shoulder blades moving. Do I really need to strengthen my rotator cuff, or is general strength enough? So do both. So general strength for the shoulder is going to be pressing movements, pulling movements, elbow extension, elbow flexion, so triceps, biceps, and then also training the shoulder in a few other different planes of motion. So adduction across, and then you also got some lateral raises maybe for your lateral deltoid, and then also the rotator cuffs as well. So actually just train everything. There's nothing wrong with training everything, and you're better off ticking off all the boxes than leaving something to chance. And from what the research suggests and from what I've seen, more than likely, if you took off all the different boxes, then people have a much stronger base. And also, it's a win-win with rehab because more than likely you'll see things improving. A lot of the time, it's not just one thing. So a lot of the time, it's not just a rotator cuff issue. It's not just a particular muscle. It's all these things in combination. So again, what I'd usually do with shoulder rehab with a client is 2 to 3 days of rehab work, upper body strength, mobility, and I plug the rotator cuff stuff into that as well. And then maybe a bit of daily mobility, but that would be mobility stuff and not strength work for the rotator cuff. Lovely. I think that's all those answered. If you enjoyed the video, just let me know. And if you want to work with me, just check out the top link down below. I will see you guys tomorrow, 6 o'clock. Sorry, I was a little bit late.